Uh, let's let's go ahead and officially begin our gathering. I'm going to call on Rebecca to get us started.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's virtual panel, Retiring the Red Raider Nationwide, a conversation with activists around the country. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Rebecca Leclaire, and I'm one of the leaders of Retire the Red Raider, an effort in Gaston County. I'm also the chairperson of Metrolina Native American Association. I'm a commissioner for the Commission of Indian Affairs of North Carolina, and I'm an enrolled member of the Lumbee Tribe. And my coordinator, co-moderator tonight is Reverend Dr. Richard Boyce, a Presbyterian minister, former mayor of Belmont, and a parent of South Point graduates. Before we jump into our panel tonight, I am just going to briefly tell you about our campaign, if you're unfamiliar. Retire the Red Raider is a coalition of students, teachers, alumni, community members, and Native leaders working since June 2020 to retire South Point High School offensive Red Raider mascot. We are committed to removing names, logos, and actions that perpetuate negative stereotypes about Native people and to working with the community to choose a mascot that better represents the values of inclusivity and unity that Belmont and South Point aspire to. We are working at the school, county, and state level to make sure that the Red Raider and other mascots like it are retired and that schools instead honor Native Americans by teaching accurate Native American history and learning about our actual culture and heritage in collaboration with tribal leaders. I'll now turn it over to Mr. Boyce.
Yeah, I'm following a script that was given to me, and it leads off by talking about how change can often feel impossible. And just a quick personal note, I've been engaged in change in faith communities, in the city of Belmont, in academic communities. It's hard everywhere, but I must testify this has been one of the most difficult efforts at change I've ever been engaged in. And it both makes me think this is more essential because I believe our indigenous peoples are the most invisible members of our community, of any underrepresented community, but also how difficult this is, particularly in small towns where the sports programs are the key to identity for many of our long-standing citizens. That was a little aside. So back to my script. While change can often feel impossible, especially as we enter a third year of working on this issue, we are encouraged by the fact that almost half of the 73 schools that had American Indian mascots in 2002 have since retired those mascots. According to the National Congress of American Indians, 68 schools retired American Indian mascots in 2020, followed by 61 schools in 2021. And we are also aware of many school districts that have specifically retired Red Raider mascots, including Colgate University, whose mascot inspired South Point's adoption of the Red Raider mascot. They removed red from their name and officially dropped Native American references in 2001. Andrews High in High Point, here in North Carolina, which kept the Red Raider name but changed the logo to a Cape Crusader with a red cape in 2004. I'm still confused by the Caped Crusader linked to Raiders, but maybe we'll get some insight there as well. Barnstable School District in Barnstable, Mass. Retired their Red Raider mascot in 2020. I believe that's close to some of our panelists tonight. Bellefonte Area School Board in Bellefonte, PA, voted to retire their Red Raider mascot in 2021. And we also acknowledge that several states, including Maine, Colorado, and Washington State, have banned Native American mascots at the state level, sometimes with limited exceptions for tribal schools or where tribes have given explicit permission to a school. And we'll reference state level efforts in our discussion tonight. Tonight, we're honored to be joined by some leaders from Pennsylvania and Massachusetts who have been part of recent successful efforts to remove the Red Raider name and logo from their school districts. I'm going to ask each of our panelists tonight to briefly introduce themselves with your name, where you're from, and how you were connected to the school or district whose mascot you removed. We'll begin with Ellie Davis, leader from Radnor for Reform, Radnor, Pennsylvania. Ellie.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. And thank you for everybody who's coming to listen and ask questions tonight. So I'm from Radnor, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of the Philadelphia area. And I'm currently a senior, almost done with school, graduating on June 8th. And our school district retired its Raider name and associated Native American imagery in September of 2020. And the process to replace that took most of the following year, but now we are the Radnor Raptors, which is what I'm thrilled to be graduating as.
Thank you, Ellie, and congratulations on your nearing graduation. Next, Jana Callinger, leader from Change the Name, Melrose, Massachusetts.
So my name is Jana Callinger. Thank you everyone for being here and for your efforts. It's exciting to see this, these kinds of movements across the nation. So in Melrose, I'm a parent of twins who are in 6th grade. And our efforts began back when my kids were in kindergarten. I am embarrassed to admit that I moved to Melrose not realizing that the high school had such racist imagery, and when I found out, I was incensed. So we'll get more into the details later, but Heather and I got together and really started a movement here in Melrose.
All right, Heather, why don't you follow your co-worker, Jana?
I'm Heather Lavelle. Thank you so much for having this panel. It's so wonderful to be with you all tonight. As Jana said, I too did not realize before moving to Melrose, Massachusetts, that they had a racist mascot. When I did, I was mortified, and we moved to the city when my son was 2 and my daughter hadn't been born yet. And I thought, oh my goodness, you know, I really hope someone does something about this before they get to be school aged, or else I'm gonna have to. And no one did anything about it. And I'm so grateful to have connected with Jana through, it was a PTO meeting, I think, when we first started talking about this. And that was 6 years ago that we started working on the Red Raider project. We've had some success, but it did take a while. And we'll, as Jana said, we'll explain more about the process later on. And I'm calling right now, I don't live in Melrose anymore. I am in Bedford, Massachusetts, which is not far from Melrose, and it's the traditional unceded territory of the Massachusetts tribe.
Thank you, Heather. All right, I'm gonna turn it back over to Rebecca for our first question. We do, though, welcome everybody who's with us. We've got some faces who've been with us through the duration of this, but some new faces. Mark, welcome. I've got a fella pastor with me on the screen. Greg, thank you for joining us. Someone who's here with us for the first time and works for Gaston County. Glad to have you with us, Greg. Thanks to our reporters that are with us and our longtime supporters who've joined us once again. So, Rebecca, why don't you kick us off with your first question?
Okay, thank you. And at the end, we'll definitely have some question and answering for our audience at the end of this presentation. To start, for our panelists, and again, thank you for being with us. Can you tell us about your town and the mascot you were trying to remove, including any relevant history of the town or mascot, or activities and practices associated with the mascot?
Okay, I guess we'll begin, just go through in the order we had. Ellie, you want to lead us off, and then Jana and Heather?
Sure, thank you. So our mascot was the Radnor Raider, previously known as the Red Raider. So it emerged from that title of the Red Raider, and it's Native American imagery with feathers and the associated Native American face. And this evolved from a long history of Radnor High School, and there was a teacher at the high school who went by the name of Chief Matoxin, who at some point there's an evolution, there's not an exact history line, but a lot of the proponents of the Radnor Raider say that the evolution of adopting the Raider mascot came from this man as a way to honor him. And so that was the narrative going behind the Raider. And so then in 2013, there was a big effort to try and make some change. And what happened then was there was a pullback of the use of the name Red in the title. And then there was the retirement of the dressed mascot, the person in the costume at the football game. So that did not appear anymore. For a time, there was more rollback of the face imagery, but it's unclear how it got reincorporated because it was still very prevalent in 2020 when we were working on the issue as well. So that was sort of the evolution. It was the Radnor Raiders, no longer often referred to as the Red Raiders by the time that I was working on the issue. And so it has a very, very deep history and a very passionate alumni basis. And that was a chief reason behind the fact that there wasn't more progress made in 2013 when they were attempting to do that. And another part of the chronology that is super important that I'll mention is that, you know, there was a very divided school board politically for a long time in Radnor, and it was primarily Republican school board members who were adamantly in support of the mascot. And then for a while it was very divided, but in 2018, during that midterm elections, it was a complete overhaul of the school board, and it was a school board of entirely Democrats and people who were ultimately sympathetic to our cause. And so that was a big piece of the story when we picked up the cause in 2020 with our group of students. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Ellie. I think we'll reveal there was really no history here in South Point other than a desire for a more aggressive mascot, which Colgate University inspired. But also, in contrast, we don't have a very divided school board right now. That will come out in our discussion. All right, let's go on, Jana.
I think I'm going to take this one. So the history of the Red Raider in Melrose. Melrose started out as the red and white. This was the early 20th century. And then sometime in the 1920s or 30s, I think 30s, the newspapers began to refer to the football team as the Red Raiders. And then in the 1950s or so, we start seeing the explicit references to the Red Raiders with images combined with images of Native people and words like savages and things like that. And it really did, like, part of our process of educating the community was to talk about this history. And I went through many, many yearbooks and I found a lot of images and I put a timeline together. And provide context for how this all started, which was very parallel to what was going on in general in the country. When you think about when these mascots proliferated, it started at the turn of the 20th century into the 1950s, when sort of the so-called Indian Wars came to a close, so the military offenses against Indigenous nations, and then we see a lot of cultural genocide happening, and mascots being a form of cultural genocide. It's like the conqueror's mentality. Taking your culture is like the last way to conquer someone. And so in Massachusetts in particular, we have quite a few Native American, like more than the other states, I believe. When in 2016, when Janet and I started this, there were about 40 public schools in Massachusetts with racist mascots. And today, so 6 years later, we are down to about 29. So Massachusetts has this distinction of having a lot more than most states. There's something to that, and we're not quite sure what that is. I do have some images from the yearbooks if you wanted me to show them, but now I'm thinking like they're gross and they're racist, and I don't know if that would, I know we have some Indigenous folks on this call, and I'm not sure, if that would be appropriate or desirable, but it ran, the images, headdresses, behaviors at games, like the cheerleaders wearing feathers and tomahawk chop band playing the tomahawk, quote, tomahawk chop, and a raider. So we've got the the face painting, you know, the mimicry, all the associated behaviors. It's not just the imagery, it's the behaviors that accompany the imagery that's problematic. And then a whole, like 2 or 3 generations have been taught that this is normal. And it's hard when people grow up learning this as being something that's normal, and learning that this is what Indigenous people are. They're not real, they're cartoons. That is a very difficult thing to change, that deprogramming. So I think I'll just leave it at that. I don't know if we need to see the images.
Thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
And perhaps you can send us those images, and Laura, we can decide how we might use those constructively. Thank you, Heather.
Yeah, because we did use
sensitivity.
them.
Yeah.
We did use them for public talks in town to educate the community. And when you see it all laid out like that, it's you really do understand how horrible it is and was. So it really did have an impact and helped a lot.
I would like to tack on to what Heather said. One of the tactics that the people who wanted to keep the name tried to use was to downplay that imagery and to pretend like it was in the past. And then there was also a yearbook or two during World War II that had a bomber plane as the mascot, because World War II and everyone was, you know, behind the war. And so some people tried to claim that was the true origin, and there's this whole historical fight. And I have to give Heather so much credit because she did the research. And because she did the research, we were able to disprove these claims. And she even won someone over who originally was trying to say, oh, well, the origin was this bomber plane. And she did the research and said, no, it's not. And now he is one of our biggest proponents. He's part of our tight circle that has really kept this movement going. And it was Heather appealing to his sense of history that won him over.
Way to go, Heather. We need some stories of people being won over. So I hope we'll get back to some of those. I thank you, Heather, particularly though, for your historical perspective. This name was adopted in the 1940s, and I don't doubt that the people who adopted thought they were acting sort of individually here, but I thank you for placing that in a larger historical movement. All right, I think I'll move to the next question. This has to do with how things began. How did you get started in your campaign? Who was involved? And how did you engage the community members at the beginning? If y'all could talk about that a little bit. Ellie?
Yeah, so I had a very student body centered approach to this issue. When I was throughout my freshman year and sophomore year, it was something that some of our teachers brought up. We had a project freshman year that we had to create an interest group, and some students in that class, not including me, but we then worked very closely together, had an interest group that was to eliminate the Raider, and we eventually used that website that they used for their school project, which was cool. And so then we connected with this club at our high school, this activism club, and they were kind of looking for a project to tackle. And so we were working with them. This is my sophomore year, so 2019, going into the school year of the pandemic. And we first went to our principal and we were talking about this because we really didn't know where else to go. And we kind of got sent on a wild goose chase saying that, you know, we need to survey the alumni network and talk to all these people and jump through all of these hoops. And then we kind of started down that track throughout the school year, and the pandemic hit and there was just this overhaul of everything that was structure in our lives. And we came back together, and this was also in the wake of the tragedy of George Floyd and the overall national racial reckoning that our country was going through. And we came together and said, this is a really good time to push for this. And we can see how this is a very concrete local thing that we can focus on with this greater national awareness. And then eventually we said, forget this wild goose chase that our principal sent us on. We're going to go straight to the school board, and we're going to form our own timeline and our own goals for how we're going to do this. So we got this group of students and we came together, and then we set out our timeline, our goals, what we wanted to do. And there was a lot of advocacy involved in this. I remember we spent like 4 hours on one summer day painting these signs that we had, like these old political recycled signs. We painted them white and we repainted them over with our slogan and everything. And we launched our social media platforms and did a lot of our advocacy that way, as Gen Z does. And so then we also were focusing on having some background research, some one-on-one meetings with school board members, and we really delegated, and it was a great group effort. And meanwhile, there were other groups of adults that were also advocating, and they were advocating. It was good because we got to be a very positive student group that the school board really wanted to work with, because it's great to work with students and students that have a positive mindset. And so that's the angle that we really leaned into with this. And we were really fortunate to have a receptive school board that was generally willing to meet with us. And so that's how we got our community outreach going and our group Radnor for Reform going.
Thank you, Ellie, so much. The bright spot in all this has been my deep experience of the tenacity of our Indigenous peoples first, and then second, our students. Our students have been speaking to our local school board every month for over 2 years with intelligence, passion, and commitment. It's Ellie, it's an inspiration to hear you talk and witness to us here. All right, Jana and Heather.
So I'll start fielding this one, and Heather can jump in. It's fascinating, Ellie, to listen to your story, because ours is quite the opposite. So as we alluded to earlier, Heather and I met over a PTO meeting. I remember, Heather, after the meeting, you approached me and said, "Now, what do you think of it?" And I said, "I think it's racist." And I think that was like what bonded us in that moment. So Heather arranged for us to meet with the superintendent, and the superintendent at the time was someone who has a really hard personality. She's very brusque and can be a challenge to work with. So we approached her, and it quickly became apparent that Heather and I had not done our homework because she just lobbed all these questions at us. That would be, one of my biggest pieces of advice would be to do your homework ahead of time. And she totally, we felt at the time that she had brushed us off. And she really put the onus on us. But one of the big things that she said that really, like, after she said it, Heather and I didn't know what to do. She told us that we were not allowed to meet with students. Now, Heather and I, our kids at the time were in elementary school, and we wanted to meet with the high school students. There was a club called Do the Right Thing. We thought that would be perfect, but she pretty much forbid us from meeting with the students. And we were a little unclear on, can she really do that? There's freedom of association in this country, but we also didn't want to make her mad. So we went about it by approaching adults, doing presentations at different meetings, starting a Facebook group. And we had a couple of members who met with the leader of the opposition and talked to him. And then unbeknownst to us, it wasn't until this year, I don't know if you knew about it earlier, Heather, I certainly didn't, that we found out that the leader of the opposition met with the superintendent and I guess a few other people, I think the principal of the high school, behind closed doors, and made kind of this, this agreement that be okay with removing the feathers as long as they kept the name, our name, and wouldn't push it. And that was kind of like the behind closed doors agreement that we just recently found out about. So there's a lot more to the story, but those were the beginnings.
A couple of things to add real quick to what Jana was saying. Two things that she said to us. Well, I guess there are several things she said to us that day that took us a little bit by surprise, but one thing that really left an impression on us too was when she said, "I don't want this issue to rip the community apart." Because at that time, another town was making statewide news, Tewksbury, Massachusetts, for its Red Men mascot. A bunch of parents had gotten gotten together and started an effort to change the mascot. There was this huge community backlash. It was all over the local news. And that's exactly like during all of that is when we went to speak to her. And we just thought, that was really enlightening, because these people are prioritizing the comfort of the white majority in this situation, right? Not the safety or the well-being of all of the students, not just Indigenous students. So that was a reminder for us that, or the first example, and we would get many more examples of this, that attitude, like, we need to compromise, we need to do, we need to assure people and take it slow and not offend people. And really that's not what it's about. But you have to learn how to respond to people like that. And the other thing she said was, where are all these Native people who have a problem with the mascot? So again, it gets back to that lack of education of the basic existence of Indigenous people, and which is exactly the problem of mascots. So that shows you that there's just a lot of education. That showed us, and we did not know how to answer that question. It showed us that we had a lot of learning to do, and then we needed to do a lot of education in our community.
Oh, I do want to add one more thing. Early on, Heather and I met with our state senator, and he about a bill that was going through the Massachusetts state legislature to remove Native American imagery from high school, from mascots. And he totally brushed us off. And we thought, we made no impact whatsoever. But now he's a co-sponsor of a bill to get rid of Native American mascots. And we heard through the grapevine that it was that meeting that Heather and I had with him that really got him interested in this. So we found that, even when you don't think you're making an impact and you feel discouraged, you never know. You're planting seeds.
Jana, thank you again for a hopeful metaphor there, planting seeds. Yes, we've tried. We've had contact with the superintendent and the school board individually and so forth, mostly through public comment, but we've not made many inroads there. And the state level efforts have been mostly from our engaged Native American groups. But looks like we've got at least 3 Indigenous citizens with us on the screen. Frankie, welcome. Jeff and Simona, glad to have you here. And Rebecca, ask your question about how we engaged Indigenous people from the beginning.
Yeah. So following up, I think it was Miss Heather. I couldn't help but giggle a little bit when you said they asked about, where were all these Native Americans that had a problem with the mascot. I truly am one of those that believe it shouldn't take Native Americans to change the mascot. It should just take moral and ethics and a little bit of common sense. So leading up to that, did either one of your groups have Native Americans involved with your efforts, and how did their perspectives change after all of this? How did it affect the debate with the Native Americans? How did it affect them, and did you have Native Americans involved?
Go, Ellie.
Yeah, so I mentioned previously Chief Matoxin as he went by, and it was interesting because we made contact with his granddaughter. He was alive in the mid and working at Radnor in the mid 20th century. His granddaughter made a public comment saying that his family is not happy with the mascot, and they're not happy with the way that it's evolved, and they don't see it as honoring him. So that was a great victory, we thought, to have that input. We didn't have any, Radnor's a very white community. We didn't have any specific local Native American voices saying that this is something that's offensive and needed to be changed. We did have a woman who is working currently in Neshaminy, Donna Fan Boyle, who that is a very long battle that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with here. And she's working on statewide legislation as well as a final goal. But the thing that I really wanted to emphasize, and I kept saying it again over our advocacy work, is similar to what you were saying, Rebecca, is that having a mascot that shows a racial stereotype is bad for all students. It's bad for any students of minority who are at Radnor High School who see that that's an okay way to treat a group of people. And it's really bad for the white students who are in a place of education and are seeing that that's okay. So that's what we wanted to emphasize. And then it was also got very, very chaotic when there was another descendant of Metoxin who said that they were fine with it. And so, you know, there's always going to be somebody who finds a voice of a Native American person who says that the mascot is fine. And they say that that can represent all Native people. And then there's a voice, someone saying that it's offensive. And when those two opinions clash, it's just a he said, she said kind of thing, but we can put that out the window and change the debate to say that, no, this is something that is bad for all of us, regardless of what community that we're a part of. It's bad for anybody to categorize a group with a racial stereotype, and it's bad for everybody who sees that. So it's not a matter of he said, she said, it's a matter of this is what's best for us as a community and as white students.
Thank you, Ellie. You're giving us the core arguments I think we've talked about, but need to stay consistently focused on. Heather and Jana.
Yep. So we, after the superintendent said that to us, you know, we're all these Native people, we thought, you know, well, we need to do more work. We need to do more research and learning. And we did, we found the Massachusetts tribe. They are alive and well. They are amazing. And they have been working on getting rid of mascots in schools in Massachusetts territory for many, many years. So we engaged with them. We learned about their perspectives because we feel very strongly that any issues that we as non-Native people are going to engage in that involve or that directly impact Native people, we need to have guidance from and have them know what we're doing and make sure that we're doing what they would be, you know, what they would approve of and what their not work counter to their goals, right? And so Jana mentioned that there was a bill at that time that had been proposed. It was a by request statewide bill, meaning a constituent filed it in Tewksbury. Now, by request bills never pass, but in this instance, this one got a lot of momentum behind it because of, you know, school districts. Some white folks in school districts were starting to wake up a little bit, and we got connected to some of these statewide Indigenous leaders working on these issues. And now, and around that time, a coalition was formed with representatives of the North American Indian Council of Boston, Indigenous, the United American Indians of New England, and some members of the tribes and non-Native allies. So we have a core group and we work together and we support each other in different legislation now, mascots, Indigenous Peoples Day, curriculum, several other bills. It's called the Massachusetts Indigenous Legislative Agenda. So now we have a way of staying in communication. This was all just happening when Jana and I started this process and in Melrose, and all the pieces just started coming together. The mascot battle in Melrose went on for years, and it only, I think, was recently resolved because of the input from the Sagamore of the Massachusetts tribe. He called into public hearings. He really took time out of his busy schedule, his family, his tribe, his people to help us. He does it for other cities and towns in Massachusetts territory. And for us, it's just about like finding the balance between making this an issue that citizens should resolve on their own because it's the right thing to do for all of our children, and incorporating Indigenous voices. because the whole time what we try to do is center Indigenous voices in these debates. Because it gets lost so easily when people want to compromise or people are talking about tradition. This isn't about your tradition. Your tradition, your sadness over the loss of your tradition does not, trump pain and harm that you're causing people. And so we constantly have to recenter the debate, and by having Indigenous voices participate, it makes our job a lot easier and it's a lot more impactful. And that's really what has helped us a ton in Melrose get this to the finish line.
I have to add that Heather's being very generous when she says we. She's the one who did the reaching. She's much more outgoing than I am, and I am so appreciative because that made our work authentic and real, and it just makes me so proud that we were able to do it in a way that centered Native American voices. Oh, and I also wanted to say one of our early presentations also sparked a member of our community who said that prior to seeing our presentation, she didn't think a thing of it. And she really helped spearhead the efforts to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day here in Melrose. So again, it's planting those seeds, sparking that fire. It would not have happened if it was just me and Heather. It was really everyone who got involved.
Right. And we did learn too that there are Indigenous people in the community who are afraid to speak out, and they shouldn't have to. Though Melrose is, mainly a white community, there are Native people among you all over. We have Native people are, and among us, and but these are such painful issues, and they don't feel safe speaking out. And so when you get partners who will do that despite the trauma, that it causes for them, it's just really humbling and we're so grateful to have had that.
We also had people who had, a smidgen of Native American ancestry claiming to be Native American and speak for Native Americans. That was frustrating.
We can share that experience. We do have, as I said, 3 members of Indigenous tribes here in North Carolina with us. The Halawasaponi tribes represented here on the screen. As you already heard, Rebecca representing the Lumbee tribe, and our own Catawba tribe has been represented by people in this conversation. The deep sort of paradox, and that it's not fair that Indigenous people are required to carry this debate, and yet if the Indigenous voice is left out of the debate, that's not right either. That's sort of a dance we've already been engaged in that we could get some further wisdom on. I think I'm going to skip my question about decision makers. I do see that Jeff Ramsey, the chair of our local school board, has joined us here. Jeff, thank you for listening in on this. We've already heard some reports about differences and the sort of political makeup of school boards and the way to approach the superintendent and the school board on this. Let's skip over that one. And Rebecca, why don't you move on to your next question? We're going to have to wrap the discussion up here in about 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay. Yes. What were your biggest barriers you encountered and the most effective arguments used against your efforts? How did you overcome these?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was debates about the process that the school board went through to make the vote. What happened was we started our advocacy publicly in June of this summer, and September 2nd they had a vote to retire the Native American imagery and the name Raider. And so that was a shock for a lot of people. And there's a lot of claims from people that this was a bad time. We should have been focused on getting our students back in school. We were all at our beach houses Some people literally said that. And the thing is that this is not an issue that should be settled in the court of public opinion in a place that is not educated about what the voices of Native American people are saying. And so it was, the greatest barrier was probably that next year of trying to find a new mascot. I happened to be selected for this committee that the school board or the school district was running to have community input for what the new mascot might be. And that was just a very, very chaotic situation, because what was going on simultaneously is there was momentum building for the election of 4 of the school board members. And so there was a lot of energy put forth by people who were resentful of the mascot decision to try and promote their own candidates. And that was fueling the fire. And I remember this June school board meeting where eventually the committee kind of ran into a disaster because nobody was willing to talk about new mascot ideas when half of the people were committed to keeping the old mascot. So they kind of sort of did away with the committee, but sort of like went off of a survey response that we did in the end. And then it was a student vote, and the students voted to have the raptor. And that was compared to the R's, just the letter. And that was really a ploy from the people who wanted to keep the Raider to put that in as a placeholder while they could reelect some different school board members. And so at this June meeting, there was a lot of, it was a very impassioned meeting of a lot of resentment, because that was when the school board voted to approve the student vote of the decision of raptors. And so that went through, but this momentum kept building over the summer. And I felt like I couldn't really give a sigh of relief that the decision was finalized and secured until the election happened and those 4 school board members stayed in place. So that was when I finally felt secure that I didn't have to be like so up to date and like still pressing and focused on this issue. I could breathe a sigh of relief that this was something that actually was a concrete thing at that final point. So it was the passion combined with the political motivation was the biggest issue in the end.
Thank you again, Ellie. Jana and Heather, just right quick.
Yeah, I would say those were the same for us. If people don't like a decision that was made, they complain about the process, and then it becomes all about the lack of transparency, which was not the case in our situation. There are plenty of public hearings and surveys and things like that. And then also this, and early on when we started, it was this perception that we're just a bunch of white people, virtue signalers. And I think what helped us as time went on was just education, Indigenous voices getting into the mix, and Indigenous folks organizing, so that like now there's a website, the Massachusetts Indigenous Legislative Agenda, that has on it the explanation of the mascot bill and why it's important. And so we can point to that, Indigenous folks, this is something that they have been working on for many years. This isn't something that we are just thinking is good for them. And so, but awareness, I think most people generally know that now, that Indigenous people, most Indigenous people don't like mascots. But in the beginning it was tricky. And then a lot of people, just their ignorance, not being aware of the existence of Native people and needing to understand. We were able to educate a lot of folks in our community who just hadn't had the issue on their radar, didn't really think about it. And I think what Ellie was saying about the issue with the politics and the school committees, that is a very tricky one. And that is why we need statewide bills banning mascots in public schools, because these decisions are not safe. North Brookfield last October, their school committee turned over and reinstated their racist mascot in Massachusetts. And this should not happen. In Melrose, the school committee voted to eliminate the Red Raider and rename the mascot to the Red Hawks. We had a group of citizens get petitions to try to get it on the ballot so that the public would vote whether or not to be racist. They didn't get enough signatures to get this question on the ballot. But these are the things that happen in cities and towns, and this is why we need to also be advocating for statewide legislation.
All right. I believe we're within less than 15 minutes of our stop time, so we need to move to question and answers. What a rich discussion and how many parallels we see. The problem of making this a local popular vote, that's not the proper way to go about this. The necessity of having Indigenous voices in, but not asking our Indigenous neighbors to carry the full weight of this. The requirement to work both locally and at the state level. Change, we're back to change, and I do think that's a deep part of our story here. We're a little suburb of Charlotte where change is coming at us at a breakneck pace, and this local sports program and this local high school are at the core of this little town's identity. And it's been terribly, terribly difficult to help people see this is an issue of education and sensitivity to our Indigenous neighbors. This is not an attack on the local sports program and the coaches and players involved in that. So that's been a difficult thing, and we've made almost no progress locally and are of necessity moving some towards the state level. Let me open us up to Q&A from our crowd. It's going to be hard for Rebecca and me to manage, but either give us a Zoom hand or wave at me. Go ahead, Simona.
Hi, everyone. I was very, very happy to find this group through one of my tribal members in North Carolina. I live in a community, if you live in Pennsylvania, you're probably very familiar with Coatesville, who is extremely known for their mascots. And I have many generations of my family that live here, and we are fighting this battle on our own. And right now we're at a point where we're very afraid for the safety of our children who go to these schools. And my question is, how did you handle that? I personally have had death threats on myself. My children both play sports. My niece and nephew play on the football team. My nephew plays on the football team. My son plays on the football team. And my daughter is getting ready to try out on the cheerleading squad that these Raiders are a part of. I don't know how to go about handling this, but I don't want to give up. And so I guess the question is, how did you handle the safety issue with the threats and things like that?
Anybody? Jana, Heather, Ellie?
I will say that Massachusetts has really strong bullying laws. You said you were in Pennsylvania. I don't know what the laws are in Pennsylvania, but that would definitely be worth looking into.
Yeah, I think that a big factor in our advocacy that reassured me was that it was during the pandemic, so I wasn't seeing my peers face to face every day. Like, the social media attacks were definitely intense, especially when they were from adults who had parents of children in my grade were really the most vicious people coming after us. But I had a boy who was a grade above mine trespass in my yard and take a knife and cut down a sign that I had. But it was helpful that I didn't have to return to school for another 6 months of online school. And so some of the dust had settled at that point. But I can imagine how I truly might not feel as confident doing the same advocacy then now going to school every day, because seeing those people face to face, it's a very different thing in terms of feeling safe and feeling confident to do that. But I was really fortunate that I had people who were working on it with me, and that's whenever I felt, it's very easy to be felt insecure or question yourself when you're going up against these people and speaking. But when you can look side to side and see that these people that you respect are doing it with you, that's how I got my confidence back and felt more secure and safe doing it. But I'm saying this as a white student who is not even the target of these stereotypes either. So I just want to say that I can understand how when you're going to school every day and that's very intimidating and very it's a difficult issue, and I don't have the answers to all of that, but I can see how that would be a really difficult situation.
I feel by my children being Native that we wouldn't experience the threats to the degree that Ellie, you would, because we have had a couple of white advocates speak up for us that were just terribly bullied to the point to where they just gave up. But basically, it's just trying to educate the community now, because they truly feel that I should feel honored that they picked me to represent our school, which they're not even doing in a very nice way, in an honorable way. So how did you go about educating the community? Was it through social media? Was it at the school board? Because that's at the level that I'm at right now, trying to educate the community that I live in. I'm sorry if I'm hogging all the questions.
I will say that in the queer community and talking about queer youth, we've always preached safety first. So that's, I think that's important to keep in mind. But a lot of our education of the community came through presentations, speaking at school board meetings, social media, and we took the approach of using the phrase, when you know better, you do better, so that the people whose identities were tied up in the RR name didn't feel as threatened, right? We tried to make the point that, you know, now that we know better, we do better to try to help bring them aboard.
All right, I will say anti-bullying is, verboten here in Gaston County Schools as well, and we've made it very clear from the beginning. While we've been frustrated with whether the principal or the school board is responsible for re-examining mascots, there's been no ambiguity. If a student feels bullied, they need to go to the principal. And I don't think our principal here at South Point High School would deny that's a proper response. And if no satisfaction is given there, that goes to the school board. And I would think Jeff would agree that any experiences of bullying are right in the wheelhouse of local schools and their jurisdiction. We've just got 5 minutes here. I know the folks who have been with us along the way will have an opportunity to process and think through some of this. Let me call on a few folks. Monroe, you're with us. Did you hear anything you want to emphasize in this discussion? You've been involved in similar processes elsewhere. Anything, Monroe, you might add quickly?
Just quickly, Charlene Teeters, who has been called the Rosa Parks of American Indians, she pointed out that it's as if a sheet is handed out around the country, because what you all heard is what we have heard. And the same issues come up over and over. And I really like your don't go on a wild goose chase, Ellie. That was very wise, because they will get you off on a wild goose chase. And it is our dirty laundry, those of us who are white. So, and putting it on that whole question of where are the Native Americans that are upset about this, all of that is distraction from what I think is right there in all the school policies on non-discrimination and on their mission statement. They are there to educate every student. And are you going to educate students that it's okay to make fun of their culture and trivialize their culture? It's just, I'm just very inspired listening to you all, and I congratulate you. And I just want to know where Ellie's going to go next year and what she's going to do.
I believe she can go anywhere she wants.
I think you're right. And I think she has shown so much maturity and wisdom far beyond many of the adults that you've had to deal with. And I just admire it so much. And if you want to share, I'd love to know what you're planning to study and do.
Thank
No
you
ch-
so much. I'm going to Williams College next year, and I will be rowing.
Oh, that's my wife in the background, whose father's an alumnus. Ellie, excuse
Oh, wonderful.
me. Go, go
I have
purple
lots
cows.
of I have lots of Massachusetts roots.
Y'all get this. You know what the mascot for Williams is? The purple cows.
The Eve. That's
Go
a
Eve.
mascot I can get behind.
All right, let me. That's no shade on you, Jana or Heather, because y'all have certainly helped us out here tonight. Mark, I'm going to call on you real quick. You've been around this community for a while. Any quick insights? If you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I gotta unmute myself. I don't have any particular insights. You know, the dawning of consciousness for me was slow, I think. I mean, I've been a pastor for, sometimes it feels like forever. And my son went to South Point. We loved going to see games, and it was really only as I started working on anti-racism efforts, particularly regarding the African American community, that I started thinking, wait a second, this covers every community that is underrepresented, whose voices are not heard. And so I feel like a latecomer in some ways, but have always been realizing that the Christian message includes everyone being loved and treated with respect. So, yeah.
Thanks, Mark. I'd love to stretch this out because the other observation is you lead off with racism. It seems like you run into a wall, but
Yeah.
obviously that's part of the larger discussion. The issue is education, I think, and particularly education about our indigenous neighbors and the harm that such mascots are doing, not to people who lived long ago, but to our fellow citizens here with us today. Greg, I see you down there. I thank you for joining us here. I don't know if you've got any comments, and I'm not going to call on Jeff. I made it clear that if some of the school board came, they're not being asked to take a stand, but just to listen. So thank you, Jeff, for being there. Any comment, Greg?
I appreciate the invitation. I was sitting, I'm sorry, I'm traveling, so I'm in the car. But I appreciate the conversation, and my thought process is, how do we make this change and keep our community intact? And so that's what's resounding in my spirit and my thought process. And so really, how do we move the needle and make the majority happy? And so I appreciate the facilitators and all their comments, and again, for the invitation.
Thank you, Greg. I don't think there's any way for this issue not to be divisive, but it could be transformative and constructive if we continue to persist and lift up education and love of our neighbors as the primary motivation. Rebecca, any closing comment from you?
I don't have any major closing comments, but I just want to thank the panelists for being here and give us their insight. A lot of the things that they're going through is definitely things that we have definitely experienced. But we just want to thank them for their information and thank the audience definitely for being here and listening to what is going on and around the country when it comes to mascots. We Retire the Red Raiders will continue our efforts locally and at the state level. And if anybody wants any information, if you're not already on our list, we would definitely welcome you to join by going to retiretheredraiders@gmail.com and sending us an email. And we'll definitely put you on our list for all the information. But we, as an enrolled member of the Lumbee tribe, we really appreciate everybody being on here tonight, listening to what we have to say and supporting Retire the Red Raiders.
Thank you. I see some other Karen and Sarah and others that are with us here for the first time. I hope y'all will stay engaged and stay tuned. Let's give a hand for our panelists. Thank you, Jana, Ellie, and Heather. Y'all have given us great encouragement and specific counsel. Let me see whether my daughter Laura, anything else we need to do before we sign off?
I don't think so. Thank you everybody for your thoughts and insights. We will send out a link to the recording as well as put it up on our social media. We'll also try and compile some of these resources that were shared in the chat and send those out as part of the recap email. But hopefully we're feeling energized and inspired, knowing we are not alone. We're part of, a national movement. And, I think for me, hearing from the folks in Melrose that, this was for you a 6-year effort, but you did see those, the fruits of your labors and some of those conversations that you didn't think were impactful that turned out later on to be impactful. So, one of our goals, in addition to learning some strategy and getting some tips from you, is just to continue to energize ourselves and to stay hopeful, because we aren't going to get anywhere by being sort of despairing and frustrated. So thank you for that, and we'll continue on.
All right. Apologies to those I didn't call on or didn't get to speak. Please stay tuned, and if you have any feedback after the meeting, I'm sure we would be eager to receive that. Thanks to everyone. On we go. Peace be with you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.